Hello everyone, welcome to the Star Psych, and today I want to talk about intuitives and the desire for deep conversation. This is going to be another one that was inspired by something I saw on Reddit, which is kind of why I just set up with the webcam again today. I'm probably going to invest in a better one in the future, but that's besides the point. This was inspired by a post I saw on Reddit, and I'll go after it after the intro here in a second, but I want to talk about intuitives and the desire for deep conversations and how actually intuitives can get themselves in trouble when it comes to social communication and interacting with others, because it's not always going to be the sensor or sensing type's fault in terms of the communication barrier when it comes to deep conversation. And I think there's a reason for that. Let's get into it. So I'll read the Reddit post, but I'll also put it up on screen so you can read it yourself. People often underestimate how much others are interested in having deep and meaningful conversations. The study found that people consistently expected deep conversations with strangers to be more awkward and less fulfilling than they actually were. So this is a post from the r/science subreddit, and I'm not going to go over the entire study because that's not really the point here. I want to go into the overlying theme of this study as opposed to the details of the study. And I really want to talk about the idea that intuitives aren't always going to give sensors the benefit of the doubt when it comes to conversation and communication. And this is actually something that can be a negative feedback loop when it comes to building social or personal relationships with other people, and it can be a barrier for building these relationships. What do I mean by this? Well, if you look at the study, you can see here, or the general point of the study is that people don't expect other people to be interested in deep and meaningful conversations, and therefore, because they don't think that other people can have deep and meaningful conversations, they don't attempt to initiate them, and they don't give others the benefit of the doubt. And what they found was that if people gave others the opportunity to attempt to have a meaningful or deep conversation, then they most likely could provide something meaningful or deep to the conversation at hand. Why is this extra applicable to MBTI? Because intuitives are going to be more likely to be on the side of not giving other people the benefit of the doubt when it comes to having a deep or meaningful conversation. I don't know how many times I've come across intuitives who are just like, I can't talk to sensors, or they can't have deep and meaningful conversations, they're shallow, yada, yada, yada. And I look at them kind of weird and I'm like, I just don't think you understand type very well if that's really like what you think, because it's not that sensing types can't have deep or meaningful conversations. It's just that their go-to, their first initial impression when it comes to the topic at hand isn't going to be the same as you. They're going to be a little bit more broad or realistic in the sense of their conversation, or the point that they want to bring to a conversation. They're not exactly going to rush to the thematic component immediately, but that doesn't mean that they can't get there eventually. And that's the big key point here, is that sensing types can just as easily talk about these topics. You just have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and intuitive types really don't want to do that. And it's understandable, especially because when they're young, they may try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and they may fail once or twice. And because they failed once or twice, then they get into the mindset that, oh, nobody can understand the conversations that I want to have. Nobody can have a deeper, meaningful conversation. So therefore, why even try? And in psychology, counseling, therapy, this is a really bad mental habit or cycle to get into when you stop doing positive things because it failed once or twice, and you get into that mindset of, well, why even try? It's really bad to get into that mindset, because then you can never get that satisfying thing, or you're going to be looking for the one specific exact opportunity that's going to be super safe to ensure that you're going to get that thing. Like, you're only going to go to talk to people about deep conversations at like a philosophy meeting or something, or you're going to join Discord servers who are surrounded with people who are only going to talk about things in a very specific manner. And then you lose out on the potential for broader perspectives and seeing things from different angles. Ironically, as an intuitive type, you're losing out on perspectives if you don't talk to the people who maybe have a slower time reaching that kind of intuitive grasp that you have about the topic. And again, it's not because they can't understand the themes, it's because it's not the first thing that they're going to notice. Just as you, as an intuitive type, are not likely to notice the details first and foremost when you have a conversation with someone. It's going to take you time to get there. And it's why sensing types look at intuitive types and go, well, why can't they just see what I see? And you look at them and you think, why can't they see what I see? both can see the other side. It's just going to take time to get there. And giving the other person the benefit of the doubt is really going to give you the opportunity to potentially build more satisfying social and personal relationships with other people. Another thing that intuitives tend to have to think about and be careful about, especially when it comes to personal maturity and growth, is like, what defines a deep conversation? Because I can promise you that slapping the word deep over anything that you're talking about doesn't make it a deep conversation. And this is something particularly that all the INF types are extremely guilty of, INFPs and INFJs. I see it across their subreddits, I see it across Discords, I see it in communications. They literally will just slap the word deep on something and be like, it's a deep conversation. And I'm just like, you can't just throw the word deep on something and make it a deep conversation. Like, what about the conversation is deep? What are you actually talking about here? And I think this is something that gets lost. And then they start to gatekeep, and this is going back to all the intuitives, not just the INFs at this point. They start to gatekeep deep conversations because they'll be like, oh, other people can't understand them. And then again, it goes back to not giving people the benefit of the doubt. Once you learn that other people, even sensing types, can have deep and meaningful conversations, you're going to unlock a huge array of social possibilities that were previously locked to you. One of my closest friends is an ISTJ, and yes, it's not the quickest for him to want to talk about something that is in the realm of the more intuitive topics, that if I were to talk to my NTP friend, for example, we could just kind of hit the topic right off the bat. We'd be able to kind of get into those things very easily. But I learned after being friends with him for years that if I gave him the chance and be like, hey, have you heard about like this thing? Like I like to talk about astronomy a lot just because I think astronomy, space, like space telescopes, those sorts of things are interesting. And once I kind of get the ball rolling and I give him a chance to give some input in return, he'll talk about the topic from an entirely different perspective that I hadn't thought about. And that's something that I learned was very useful and something that I appreciated in the friendship over time. Having someone who saw things from a completely different perspective than me, I just had to give him a chance to get into the topics that I was interested about. And sometimes it would be kind of the same for him to me because he'd want to talk about something more down to earth, maybe like an event that happened the other day or a conversation he had, that sort of thing. And he'd be interested in my input about it. And to me, it's not a shallow conversation just to talk about something that happened to you the other day. Because if a friend comes to me and they're like, hey, this happened to me the other day and it's kind of stressing me out. What do you think about it? Do you have any advice about this? To me, that's not a shallow conversation. That's like, oh, my friend needs some advice about something that happened in his life. That doesn't mean it loses the deep value because we're not talking about the philosophy of life. It goes back to that idea of like, don't just slap the word deep on something, call it a deep conversation and call it a day. You actually need to like think about, what does it mean to have a deep conversation? Are you gatekeeping the idea of a deep conversation and not allowing other people to interact with you because you think of yourself as someone who's exceptionally deep and nuanced internally, and in reality there may not be actually that much depth there? I mean, I've met many, many sensing types who I would refer to as more deep or nuanced than intuitive types, who talk about very shallow intuitive things all day. And you can talk about intuitive topics in a very shallow manner is kind of what I'm saying here. You can talk about sciences, you can talk about astronomy, and then you can stay at this very basic, like high school level of understanding at these topics and talk about how interesting these things are. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but then they slap the word deep on it and gatekeep it so other people can't participate in those conversations, or they won't allow themselves to attempt to interact with other types or other people because they're gatekeeping that conversation. And that's the dangerous aspect there, is that the intuitive types are just not often self-aware that maybe they're not actually that deep. They just have that intuitive label and they think that they're deep. Being an intuitive doesn't inherently make you deep. It makes you more likely to be interested in the themes and abstract components of a topic or idea. And that doesn't mean that sensing types can't do that or sensing types can't be deep. I can tell you I've met, again, my ISTJ friend, and I've had many, many deep conversations with him, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about the things that I personally refer to and think of as deep 24/7 for it to actually be a deep conversation. So if you're an intuitive out there, just be careful about what it means to have a deep conversation, what it means to have a meaningful conversation, and be aware that if you give other people the benefit of the doubt, there's a good chance that they will at least be able to provide you some insight. And likely it's going to be insight that you don't it's not that you don't want to hear it. It's going to be outside of your normal perspective, and it's going to be difficult for you to hear it, and you may even want to reject it at first. Because if you're someone who has those deep, meaningful conversations, you're in a Discord full of people who also have those deep, meaningful conversations, you're in an echo chamber. Whether you realize it or not, you're just in an echo chamber of a bunch of yous, and you're talking about the exact same thing, slapping the deep label on it and calling it a day. And in reality, that's not deep, because you're not really seeing the other perspectives. You're just talking about things from your very limited point of view. And it's important for you to realize that to have a full and actually meaningful grasp on a topic or something, you're going to need to reach out to the sensing types. You're going to need those perspectives that are going to be opposing to yours to really develop that full understanding of the topic at hand. The moral of the story is just give people a chance. No matter whether you're an intuitive, a sensor, a thinking, feeling, no matter what type you are, don't just throw potential communication with someone out the door because of their type. And while, yes, it does make sense that you're going to have much easier times communicating with certain types, and you're very likely to cluster towards certain personality types, it's going to be a very valuable skill to learn how to interact with the types that are not within that immediate circle. So for example, for me, one of the hardest types for me to communicate with is ESFJs and ESTJs, the ESJs. It does not come naturally to communicate with ESJs, but that doesn't mean that I can't have meaningful or productive conversations with them. It's just something that I'm going to have to work on as an individual, and it's something I'm still working on. I still struggle sometimes communicating with those two types because they tend to be often quite forward with their SI opinions, which can often be clashing with my insights about things and how things should be done. But that doesn't mean that we can't come to some sort of compromise if I were to take a step and understand a little bit more about them and how their mind works, and then maybe be willing to attempt to explain how my mind works and why I come to the conclusions that I do. Especially if you're going to be in a more long-term relationship with somebody, or even like a work relationship. If you get to the point where you can stop that person and say, hey, let me take 2 minutes of your time and let me explain to you why I think we might be clashing on our opinions and viewpoints, and maybe we can learn to communicate better if we talk about these things for a minute. That's a really valuable conversation, I think, to have, and it's something that I think would benefit a lot of people if they took that step and really tried to do it. And yes, it is going to be hard for some people, and yes, some people aren't going to want to grasp on that. And I'm not saying that you can communicate with everyone in the world, but I'm saying that if you're an intuitive type and you think that you can't have a deeper, meaningful conversation with 60 to 70% of the population, the sensing types, I just don't think you have the right mindset. I think that you're missing out on a huge potential for growth for yourself, as well as maybe even potential friendships or relationships with other people. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I would like to say have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to everyone, because I'm going to upload this probably the day or two before Christmas. So Happy Holidays to all. I would like to remind everybody that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website at sarapsych.com if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Sarah from Sarapsych. Have a good one.